Hi again then guys, and welcome to the second out of 3 car reviews of course from GT Sport 1.56, and this time we're taking a look at a car which will keep a lot of the JDM fans semi-happy, this month at least, even though some people have still been saying they wish it was, an S15 Silvia or a 240 RS, even as I myself said that would have kind of made more sense. But regardless, this is what we've got. The 180SX. It's only 30 grand on the dot, which is pretty good value. No surprises there for a Japanese car. Of course, the spec is modest compared to, a Skyline or a Supra. Not exactly designed to be that tier of vehicle anyway. Obviously, it's going to be a great drift base to work with, and a ton of people doubtless already are doing so. But another one of the great things about the vast majority of especially 90s JDM cars, from the lower to the higher end of the spectrum and everything in between, is that the weight on them is often very good, and there are some exceptions. The Skyline and the Supra, for instance, are fairly heavy, but if you compare, for instance, something like a Mitsubishi Evo to, let's say, a European sedan that has a similar level of performance, well, typically they'll weigh a lot more. And of course there are good reasons for that. Technology will be different, a lot more luxury in those cars, maybe more soundproofing, even stuff like that. But the point is, a lot of the most iconic JDM cars are pretty lightweight to begin with, and that is very good. That's a very good place to start with when you're tuning up a track car, because of course you can always add more power to something, but getting weight out of a car is a much more difficult task, especially when a lot of the weight has to do with why the car is good in the first place. For instance, trying to make a Nissan GTR lightweight is kind of difficult, because all the weight is designed to make the car better. It's all of that technology in the vehicle making it heavy in the first place. When it comes to this one though, it has a refreshingly different approach to what a Skyline has. There's no all-wheel drive, barely any, if any, computer aids to help you drive. It's more of a pure, raw, almost like 80s experience, that initial D kind of vibe of an FCRX7 or a Toyota AE86. This has that same kind of look and feel to it. Of course, pop-up lights, which are surprisingly still very popular these days among younger people, and JDM is probably a big contributing factor toward that. As I said, the spec is more modest than some. 2-litre engine, of course front-mounted rear-wheel drive, just over 200 horsepower, 203, and interestingly just over 200 pound-feet of torque as well, which is good, 202 to be exact. The weight, as I said, is good, 1,220 kilos, which, to put it into some perspective, is only about 70 kilos more than a Maserati MC12 GT1 car. That's not bad for a road-legal production car that isn't even designed to be particularly some hardcore track day variant to begin with. So, the question is, of course, is it just a good drifter, or can you use it for more? Because there are some JDM cars, or even just Japanese cars in general, if you'd rather call it that, which are very specialised. They're really, really good at one particular thing, and maybe not as good at something else. Maybe even not as good at anything else. Just that. I'm sure you can think of some. For me, for instance, I find the Toyota 86, the older one, the AE86 that is, to be fantastic for drifting. Not so much as a track car though. It's not bad, it just does not have the power, cannot hold its own on the straights against stuff like Supras and Silvias, and even ones from the time. They've got way more power, and even if you tune that up to have a similar amount of power, it's never got a particularly good top speed. Even the top end power doesn't feel that great, comparing it to something even that's on par with it sometimes. Others though can do it all. The Supra, I would argue, great drift car. You can strip a lot of the weight out and make it a good track day car. It's got the raw power to begin with. It really ticks all of the boxes, and one of the best examples I would say is the RX-7. And of course with an RX-7 you've got a relatively modest engine size, pop-up headlights, a longer bonnet with a shorter back end, rear-wheel drive. It's a great drift base vehicle, makes a fantastic track car, really good drag car. It does everything you could possibly need, realistically, from a JDM car of its time, for a good price as well. Now interestingly, everything I just said sounds like this car. And that's a good start, because having a car like this, which sounds that much like an FC RX-7, in my opinion at least, is a really good place to be working from. Now interestingly, I would not say that this car feels as responsive as an RX-7 does, and of course that is largely due to the rotary engine, but even as far as cornering, it's a little bit duller, a little bit softer. Again, Good for drifting, not necessarily great as a track car. And of course, as with any vehicle, even something like a big heavy truck, a lot of that can be remedied and improved with some tuning. Stiffen up the springs, lower the ride height, maybe give it a bit of camber if you want to, adjust the diff, all that kind of good stuff, and of course that comes into play. But even this one, for instance, that I'm driving in the video, I've tuned it up a little bit. I lowered the suspension, increased the power up to the limit of N200, so it's got a few things that are different about it. Of course, it's running on sports tyres, it's got more than enough to be working with to be potentially good in N200. And yet, throughout the course of this event, I didn't win the race. And a lot of that, of course, is down to the choice of track. But even so, I think an RX-7 in N200 would have probably climbed up the rankings quicker than this did. So with that in mind, I would definitely not say that the 180SX is a bad car by any stretch. I believe that a lot of JDM fans are going to have a ton of fun with it. I believe that by far the most popular thing this will have going for it will be the drifting, and then probably secondarily to that will be the track appeal. But even then, I don't think this will be a car which you'll see dominating lobbies when it comes to racing. It has the potential to win races, but you could argue that about any car. The right driver with the right car and the right tuning can pretty much always win, so that's not really much of a metric to go by. However, this car, I would say, it's more on the end of the JDM spectrum where you have to tune it and put effort into it to make it better, rather than it just coming naturally. It's good at certain things. Like I said earlier on, it's naturally a good drift car. The RX-7, on the other hand, as a perfect example, I would argue, just feels naturally more capable. Across the board, it's a superior car, in my opinion at least, to what this one is, even without any tuning. And doubtless there will be a lot of controversy in the JDM fandom, maybe here on the channel or otherwise, who would disagree with that, and of course that's fair enough. I'm not the biggest JDM fan when it comes to these S chassis vehicles. I'm more of an FD RX-7 or DC2 Integra kind of guy, but at the same time I can appreciate a good car regardless of its fandom and background. To me, the 180SX has plenty on offer when it comes to its tuned level, but in its stock form, not so much. Something like an Integra or an RX-7, I would argue, are better in their stock form than this is in its stock form. And that's interestingly something that I've always found, regardless of the racing game, that seems to come up again and again with this series of S chassis cars in particular. The pop-up headlights from the 180SX to the 240, even the Cell 80, they're a little sluggish in their stock form. And of course, most people tune them, but it is interesting to note, because a car that's already good, of course, gives you so much more to work with than a car that is fine and then becomes good after tuning it. But at least that's my stance. And of course, speaking of tuning, I will be doing some tune setups for these new vehicles next week. I'm not exactly sure what I'm going to be doing for this one yet. I might even do more than one tune, maybe a drift tune and a circuit tune, but really it depends how quick it is, depends how good it is, and to me I would say if it sounds like the kind of car that appeals to you, for instance if you're a drifting fan, if you like track days and cruise meetups on the Nürburgring, then you'll probably like the car. If you're looking purely for the best possible JDM car or even just Japanese car in general to work with to specifically win races, well then I would say perhaps look over something else instead. Maybe an RX-7 even. But overall that's it for my thoughts. Of course tell me yours down below. Are you happy with the car? Maybe not so much. Do you agree with what I think about it being a little bit heavy on its feet for a car that doesn't actually weigh that much? And overall, of course I'll see you next time, later on today in fact, when we review the mighty Fiat 500. But overall that's it for this vid. I'll see you then, and as always, thanks for watching.